To start things off and give our viewers a kind of, easing into the conversation, what is your assessment of the prevailing state of Sri Lanka's trade outlook?
There is some macroeconomic stability, mainly driven by debt restructuring negotiations, higher drive on tax revenues, whether it's trade policy, whether it's structural changes on the last mile and governance issues. You can't blame one party, be it the political arm or the citizenry. It's a whole combination of things, right? Like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic about where we are right now.
Right.
Fundamentals are good. Let's see how we, rocket launch from here onwards.
But when it comes to trade policy, what are the most urgent reforms you would say that are needed to, number one, help the economy and specifically, let's say, exporters?
You'd have to do a couple of things simultaneously, right? Obviously, there's no quick fix to it. Most of the problems that we have, because the problems that we have deep-rooted in how we think, a lack of knowledge where policy should be implemented as well, right? If you're a political party or an individual, you could also interpret it a certain way. So that's a bit too ambiguous, I'd say, right? So we need to create a little bit more simplification in legislation. Now, the problem here is we have too many para-tariffs, in my opinion, right? So, cess, PAL, so many. Even depending on the product or the HS code, you have various taxes coming in. So, a quick fix can be looking at the export requirement, the current export requirement, as well as what we want to be exporting in the future, right? If we work on those two, the short term and the long term of the FTA, you'll see some traction.
What reforms are needed in terms of trade policy in Sri Lanka? We spoke about all of this and more with Sanjay Samarasinghe. Stay tuned.
For 30 years, LMD has been the voice of business in Sri Lanka, capturing the pulse of the nation's corporate landscape through its iconic covers. Each cover tells a story, from the first edition in 1994 to the present day, narrating key moments, leaders and trends that have shaped Sri Lanka's business ecosystem. Over the years, LMD covers have featured thought leaders, business pioneers and game-changing innovations, reflecting the evolution of industries and the economy. As we celebrate 30 years, these covers represent more than just publications. They are a testament to LMD's legacy of excellence in business journalism and its unwavering commitment to being Sri Lanka's leading voice of business. LMD, Sri Lanka's voice of business, a legacy of 30 years.
Hello and welcome to LMDtv. The topic of conversation today is trade policy. And I'm here with the Country Manager Director of Aramex, Lanka, Sanjay Samarasinghe. Welcome to our show.
Hi, Ruwandi. Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
Lovely to have you. To start things off and give our viewers a kind of, easing into the conversation, what is your assessment of the prevailing state of Sri Lanka's trade outlook?
Cautiously optimistic, I'll say, right? There is some macroeconomic stability, mainly driven by debt restructuring negotiations, higher drive on tax revenues. So the basic fundamentals have been addressed. It's about how we work on the structural changes thereafter, whether it's trade policy, whether it's structural changes on the last mile and governance issues, or the legislation, right? So if we work on those pillars more actively and more holistically, we could reach our targets and we could fast exceed them. I mean, if you look around the region and you look around the stories, you see of younger economies than us. I say younger because Sri Lanka was one of the shining lights of Southeast Asia and the India subcontinent for a good part of, the early 19th century, right? Somehow we seem to have lost track in the last 70 years after independence due to various reasons. I mean, you can't blame one party, be it the political arm or the citizenry. It's a whole combination of things, right? If we work on the structural part, look at the efficiencies that we have today, try to move forward with the future, digitization. Trade could look good.
Right.
So, like I said, I'm cautiously optimistic about where we are right now.
Right.
Fundamentals are good. Let's see how we, rocket launch from here onwards.
Rocket launch is a good word. You spoke of changes, and I know there's a lot of reforms happening in the country. But when it comes to trade policy, what are the most urgent reforms you would say that are needed to, number one, help the economy and specifically, let's say, exporters?
You'd have to do a couple of things simultaneously, right? Obviously, there's no quick fix to it. Most of the problems that we have, because the problems that we have are deep rooted in how we think as a people, and also a lack of knowledge where policy should be implemented as well, right? So if you look at where we are today and where we need to go, you have to look at the legislation, right? So it has to be a lot more clear cut. Right now, there's too many things that can be open to interpretation depending on who you are. Depending if you're a consumer, you can interpret things a certain way. If you're a state official, you could interpret it a certain way. If you're a political party or an individual, you could also interpret it a certain way. So that's a bit too ambiguous, I'd say, right? So we need to create a little bit more simplification in legislation. But that's long term. So in the short term, you could look at things like removing some of the tax burdens that you are implying or imposing on an exporter, right? So a lot of exporters in Sri Lanka bring down raw material, import services in order to make themselves or make the product or service that they are then going to export to the rest of the world. Now, the problem here is we have too many para tariffs, in my opinion, right? So, cess, PEL, so many. I mean, depending on the product or the HS code, you have various taxes coming in. So, a quick fix can be looking at the export requirement, the current export requirement, as well as what we want to be exporting in the future, right? Looking at those requirements and then maybe removing some of those para tariffs for the inward movements for those products. So if you're talking about bread and butter export, which is apparel, look at removing some of the cess and PEL taxation for fabrics, or let's say needles you use for your stitching machines or certain machinery items. This in turn will then make us a lot more competitive in the region, at least, right? So the biggest problem we face right now is our exporters aren't competitive. And that's not because of quality per se. Again, if I go back to apparel, one of the reasons why we still operate on a global supply chain scale is because of the quality that we have, right? So quality is certainly not the issue. It's about the costs, right? And I mean, earlier when we were talking about this topic, you mentioned that you've heard a lot of people have shut down, and there's this news going around the communities. People are talking about it. Exporters are certainly talking about it. So you can reduce that issue a lot by removing some of those tariffs and also creating some structural reforms when it comes to how businesses operate in Sri Lanka when it comes to workflow and process flow. Now, if you take logistics, for example, whilst there is a good process flow in freight, be it air or sea, there's a severe lack of process when it comes to the express courier or the CEP, courier express parcel segment, right? There's almost no process. It depends on who you are and who you know and how you operate, which a process will be then imposed on you, or you'll partake in a process. And so those are the main things I'd say that can drive us to a better future. And those are the things that we should address in the short term. Whilst in the long term, we have to be a bit more robust and a bit more clinical when it comes to our FTAs with certainly the regional players like Malaysia, India, Vietnam, Indonesia. So if we work on those two, the short term and the long term of the FTA, you'd see some traction.
I want to talk about FTAs in a little bit, but you mentioned, looking at the long term. How can our trade policy, be amended, I would say, to accommodate the hopefully, growing digital economy that Sri Lanka is focusing on? I don't know whether we're focusing on it enough, but how can trade policy also facilitate that?
First of all, it needs to be included in the trade policy, right? Historically, we haven't seen services and professions included in trade negotiations, even to the point where it's been demonized in the past, right? So, ICTA, for example, where it was a free trade agreement for people and services.
Yeah.
The whole country, I'd say, demonized it in some form or the other during the discussions. Again, it was driven by a severe lack of understanding in the communities, and then I'd say the spotlight from the political side also used that particular problem for political gain. So it never happened, and whatever did happen on the services side was very limited. I mean, it was very protectionist. So that's where the problem lies, right? Liberalization versus protectionism. Protectionism isn't where you want to go. Liberalization is what you want to go, but there has to be fail-safes for liberalization as well, right? Considering especially that we are so late into this game. We claim to have become liberal in the 1960s and 70s, but really we weren't. I mean, if anything, we were one of the most protectionist economies in the world, and we are certainly still one of the most protectionist economies in the region, even in developing countries, right? So again, there needs to be a holistic view about how we are going to play this game. Liberalization is the need of the hour.
Right.
You need to do that in a way that makes sense. You have to understand that we aren't ready for liberalization as a government. You have to understand that.
Yes.
So, for example, you have to create funds and programs where you can then work with maybe the inefficient exporters or inefficient domestic players to reskill them, to upskill them, to teach them new avenues of business. So that fund can then support that, while you then encourage the newer digital-driven economies and digital-driven trade and services, while you start working on the commodity exports as well. Surprisingly, we have a lot of potential for commodity exports. A recent example was Ceylon cinnamon.
Yes.
What most people won't know is Ceylon cinnamon has been marketed to the world indirectly, without any support from the government or policy over the last 10 to 15 years. Us in logistics, especially in express logistics, we see daily a lot of products being exported out of Sri Lanka, but as a country, we are not focused on. I mean, some things you look at and you'll think, are people really buying this? Like dried mango leaves.
Wow.
Right? So if you go on Amazon or eBay and you search dried mango leaves, you'll get so many listings there. And most of those listings are being exported out of Sri Lanka.
Wow.
By some young kid out in a village who's, thought of doing something, seen something on a computer, experimented themselves,
Okay.
made some money, and doing quite well.
Well, okay.
But the problem comes into play again of sustainability.
Exactly.
Right? Because no one's focused on these people, no one's given them the right tools to be able to sustain, no one's given them that knowledge. What usually we see happening is they come into the market, they grow their business, they make a bit of money, they buy a BMW or an apartment, 2 years down the line, they made some mistakes, probably lost their business. Right? But again, a shining light of that story is what happened with cinema.
Yes.
Right? Cinnamon is now
It prevailed.
yeah, so and it's now been marketed and supported by the government, right? And by the entities appointed by the government to look into trade, like the Export Development Board, which has become a lot more active in the last few months, I'd say, right? So that's a positive again. But there's so much that you can focus on as a country. Dried mango leaves, you can go jackfruit. I mean, jackfruit is a key ingredient in a lot of artificial meat.
Yes, the vegan.
So the vegan diet,
Yes.
right? So there's a big demand in the UK, and there's only one company doing it because they've tapped into that understanding that market is there, and they keep pushing it into those markets. But as a system, because we don't recognize it,
Yeah.
it sort of becomes a monopoly, right? So these small traders or this small farmer is going to inject it into the big business at a very low cost, and the middleman sort of makes all the
Most money.
because of that lack of knowledge of what's happening around the world. So I think, long story short, organizations such as yours that are in the media can also play a part by educating people on what's actually the need of the hour,
Yeah.
which is economic knowledge, possible avenues for them to start businesses. That thought process is lacking in media. I mean, it's a holistic thing. Trade is directly tied to economics. Economics is directly tied to, transactions within one's own community to start off with. And then, of course, yes, how you integrate with the global community as well. But Sri Lanka really needs to understand how economics works, what it means, how it's driven locally first, to really come out of where we are and make, that progress that we want to see in the next 5 years.
And all the stakeholders must be involved.
Stakeholders have to be involved, and they have to all have the same end goal,
Mindset, yeah.
right? Mindset, I think it's difficult for everyone to have the same mindset. Depends from which industry you come, which background you come as a community. But certainly we can all have the same goal, right? So if we all have the same goal, we'll all work within our belief systems at least to achieve that goal. So I don't think getting everyone on the same mindset, which we've been trying to do, I think, over the last 20 years, and it doesn't
Not
happen,
working.
right? And so rather set the goalpost, get everyone aligned the goal, and give everyone the leverage and the freedom to work towards those goals by enabling them to, get there without throwing roadblocks in the middle, right? So, I mean, like I said, the removal of some import tariffs, the opening up of importing cars, for example, is a good start, right? It goes back to your basics. But there's a lot more that can be done. I mean, if you take we don't really need more cars in Sri Lanka, right? That's a critical thing that people don't understand. It's a luxury to have, but it's not what is required. You require more mobile phones in Sri Lanka. You require more laptops in Sri Lanka. You require more tablets in Sri Lanka, more cameras. Those are the things we require. And we had to focus on how do we make that accessible to the community, right? So those are like the small things that we can work on.
It's time now to take a very short break, but we'll soon be back to talk more about trade policy.
Display your brand message on digital screens at prime locations. The largest digital advertising network in Sri Lanka. Emerging Media.
Welcome back to the show. We're in conversation with the Country Manager Director of Aramex Lanka, Sanjay Samarasinghe. Sanjay, I'm going to steer the conversation slightly towards a different angle. I mean, when we talk of trade, we have to also think of, you said in a previous answer, the investments coming in. And you come from a logistics background. In the negotiations that we have with foreign investors, when we look at it from a logistics perspective, what are the kind of critical elements that gets overlooked?
If we go to talk about things that are overlooked, I think we can just go for hours, right? Rather, I'd say things that we could do better,
Okay.
certainly to start off with. Overseas investors have come in. Sri Lanka is an attractive location, right? We have to first keep that in our mind. Whether it be defense, whether it be space, for example, or logistics, we have an attractive proposition, which is why over the last so many years, 100 years, I'd say hundreds and hundreds of years,
Yeah.
we are one of the few countries that, if you take even conquering, we've been conquered by 3 different nations. That's very rare to be in such demand, right?
Of course.
And since independence also, we've had a pretty good run of foreign investors coming into Sri Lanka and setting up. Example is Aramex, for example, right? But whether the full use of that investment is made is a question. And how do we, first of all, enable the investors that have come in, that have believed in Sri Lanka, believed in its people, how do we reward them back? I think that's the catch-up game we have to first play. If we address that problem properly, I think that in itself will draw a lot more investment because we talk, right? I was recently in Dubai last week, was meeting with our stakeholders, some of our investors and our customers. I was talking about Sri Lanka. And while they are so interested in what we have to say and what we have to offer as a country, they all fall back to the point where, look, I've had a sister company or I have a friend who's invested, it's not gone anywhere. Or I'm not seeing the right return on my investment, or it's taking time, right? So these are the things that pop up in those corridor conversations, those conversations over dinner at a very high level, right? So how do you address that? To address that, you have to understand the fundamental problem, right? The fundamental problem is throughout governments, whether it be the previous one or the one before that or the existing one. The focus is on two things. One, greet and please the customer who is the investor at the initial stage. Two is the fact that governments try to sell Sri Lanka, not to incentivize someone to come into Sri Lanka. If that makes sense. I mean, if I put it a little bit more simpler, I'd say is our oil in the ground is our location, is our talent and our people. Tax holidays and financial incentivization is good, but it's not today's need. It's not what investors are looking at today. 20, 30 years ago, yes. And then on top of that, even if you give something financial as an incentive or you give them a tax break, our policies are so short term. Right? Policy is driven by a 5-year at most, sometimes 2 to 3 years. Right? So when governments change, policies change. So one thing we need to do is we need to put policy in play and legislatively guarantee those policies last for at least 10 to 15 years. There is a minimum. I'd say 20 years, brilliant.
Yes.
Tough in our environment because we are so far behind, but 10 years to 15 years, certainly it can be done. We need to move away from, those tax holidays and things like that. We had focus on talent. We had focus on investors coming in and giving them incentives based on KPIs, targets.
Yes.
Right? You hit targets, you get incentives. You hit investment targets, for example, in research and development, you get incentivized. I mean, think about that, right? We are a socially funded economy. I'd say the government funds a lot of things in Sri Lanka, right? From healthcare to education to all of that. Why not switch that around? I mean, take more developed countries or developing countries. Companies like Google or even Starbucks, which is a coffee shop, right, are incentivized for R&D, research and development, and training and development of their people. So this not only benefits the company per se because it's now looking at a lot more new things it can do. It's upskilling its people to do a lot more new things. It's also driving the economy forward, right? Because you're doing a lot more new things than what you were doing 20, 30 years ago. So it's more attractive to the consumer as well. Again, consumers have short attention spans today, right? Your TikToks, your Instagrams, products come across them fast. So likewise, we have to adjust ourselves to be able to, accommodate such a community. So those are the things I'd look at governments doing. So moving away from, that whole tax-free kind of sale to a more target-driven, KPI-driven, quality-driven, structure when you're asking for it. And I'm 100% sure that a lot of the investors also want to see that because that gives them also that
Confidence.
kind of optic that Sri Lanka is really engaged in the future and doing new things. So it's a benefit on that side. The other thing is you have to work on your last mile logistics,
Yes.
and your policies, right, when it comes to how things work on the ground. So like I said, investors come in, they'll probably meet with the president, they'll meet with the finance minister, the secretary to the president or treasury. They'd be pleased, they'd be greeted, garlands around them, documents will be signed. Investor is happy, government is happy, it's in the news, people are cheering.
Yeah.
6 months down the line, nothing's happened. Why? When you really go to set things up in Sri Lanka, when you go to your local government council, to your imports department, to customs, to get this
On the red
permit,
tape. Yeah.
that's where the problem comes, right? So on a large scale, you can't execute anything. It takes so much of time. So as an answer to this, governments can look at, again, if you look at something like an economic commission, to empower them legally to overcome any of these issues where you become sort of like a one-stop shop for your investors to come in,
Exactly.
get their approvals, get their sign-offs, and then start, creating jobs, creating products, creating services on the ground, whether it be for export or for domestic consumption.
That's true.
Right. So yeah, those are the, I think, critical two things that need to be addressed if we are to become attractive to overseas investors. And a little bit on the third side is also understanding what we have in Sri Lanka, right? Beyond just being a country that wants money to develop, what do we have to offer? Like I said, our location is our oil in the ground. Trade wise, it's very hard to avoid us, right? So even though if you take India, who was heavily reliant on Sri Lankan ports for their trade, and have been, I mean, Modi's plan 3 years ago at election was logistics. That was his roadmap, right? The next 5 years is going to be about logistics. And to that extent, Sagarmala came up in South India to compete with Sri Lanka. And almost immediately as it came up, I think we saw about a drop in about 30 to 40% of the throughput coming through Sri Lankan ports. So again, what are we doing? It's too slow. Sri Lanka ports hasn't modernized in the last 40 years. A recent example, an American gentleman who was responsible for the logistic port setup in the US said was, I remember in the 1970s, all of America's 300 plus ports had roughly about 14,000 employees in it. Sri Lanka ports has 10,000 employees in it, and it has only one port.
Wow.
Right, so
It perfectly captures the essence of issues.
That's where the crux of your issue is. You have 10,000 people working in one port, whereas maybe unfair to compare against America, but I mean it's a fair comparison in my opinion, considering technology and time is affordable and it's accessible to us as well. So 390 odd ports in the States, they have less workers than us, and they're more efficient. They handle more PEUs, they handle more throughput than we do.
Of course. Wow.
That's where the problem lies.
That gives. We've been in conversation with the Country Manager Director of Aramex Lanka, Sanjay Samarasinghe. Thank you very much. Had a lovely, insightful conversation with you.
Thank you so much, Ruwandi.
And thank you to all our viewers for joining us. Until next time, take care.
Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on Facebook, LinkedIn, Instagram, and X. Thank you for watching and stay safe.